Working at Google was something I looked up to. In fact, the first time I was in the Bay Area, standing in front of buildings which happened to be the headquarters of companies like Uber, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google, my heart would swell with pride as if I was a part of that company, as if I was contributing something. And I think that's, in general, a mind space the tech world shares. Maybe the companies you associate with today might have changed because now we have a lot of new names, but it's still there. We look up to certain companies, we feel like we belong there. When I became a little more ingrained in my career and I started working on some ideas, I realized I wanted to build something that would get acquired by Google as opposed to working at Google. And a lot has happened in my life since then. But today, our guest is someone who sold a company to Google in 2013. He started all the way back in 1999. And lately, I have been finding myself talking more to people who have seen the internet evolve, an attempt at looking backwards to look forwards. Call it my attempt at sort of satisfying myself that this has happened in the past. Whatever changes we are witnessing, this is nothing new. Sort of an attempt at basically getting an experience from how people who have seen the previous internet wave go through. What do they think about it? How they approach life. Hey everyone, welcome to Just Crunch It. I am your host, Vikram, and Just Crunch It has been curated for anyone who cares about data. This podcast is for you if you are starting up or rethinking how things will evolve with all the new technology around us. This is for you if you use data in your day to day or you are just thinking about getting started with a career in data and data science. Well, we touch upon nuances, areas where data is overglorified or underlooked, mistakes people make, perspectives, future, of course, AI, amongst other things. The goal, honestly, is just to ask some hard questions about data, business, and everything in between to develop a sense of not being left out as things around us are moving. Today, with us, we have Josh. Josh is a founder, a mentor, a coach, and lately he's been building Knect. He hosts a program in the capacity of a director with the Founder Institute. He has previously served as the head of product at BRIGIT, ALYCE, and as a VP of product at GasBuddy. Joshua also co-founded Incentive Targeting, which got acquired by Google back in 2012 and 13. He has seen it right from the age of internet boom to the age of generative AI. But don't get me wrong, he is as young as you would expect someone to be. Welcome to the show, Josh. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I was wondering what you were going to say after reminding me I saw the beginning of the internet. My very first email address was one I had to connect to via a modem. Even before I got my first AOL, my first CompuServe address, before my first school address, I had to, dial up, convince everybody in the house not to pick up the phone, and download my email. So, yep, I
Yeah,
have seen the very beginning.
I sometimes envy people who were very early on to get their emails. I just think it was a brilliant decision. I have seen some parents or friends of my uh, friends who had parents who were very forward looking, who bought them these email IDs which are like their first name. And talking about modem, of course, I don't go as back as you must have seen it, but I remember those days where like downloading a
Mhm.
2 MB file would probably be like a couple of hours. I was back in India. Internet
Uh,
progression here was even slower than you would imagine on the West Coast, or for that matter, anywhere in the US. But Josh, you just made me very nostalgic with the very first thought.
Well,
This is
my parents didn't realize it, but when I was born, they gifted me a name with incredible SEO. So you can always search for Joshua Marx, and there's very unlikely to be another one ever. So when we had our kids, we actually thought about that a little bit as well, and they didn't understand it when they were 7 or 8, and we got them their email addresses, which were just their first initial and their last name. And now that all of they're 13 and 15 now that all of their friends have email addresses like Princess Buttercup 14 or something kind of childish like that, and they have sort of pro looking email addresses, maybe one day they'll appreciate the foresight of their parents. Like I finally come to
I
appreciate the
I'm
foresight of mine.
I'm 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 sure they will. I have been on the other side where my name is as generic as it
Yep.
gets. So my name is Vikram Aditya, and back in India, for there was like a ruler, a king long back, who's very 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 renowned, and His name was Vikramaditya. So if you search anything, of course, that comes up. But lately, it has gone worse. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, has been launching a bunch of satellites. There are warships that are named after my name for
Uh-huh.
whatever reason, and that just like so. My own website, you have to type out the words in a specific format, and it's always been a challenge.
You know what? You
I'm sure your
misunderstand.
children are
What
gonna.
you have is normative determinism, right? Those satellites, those warships are named after you, right? Your future maybe is if not being a king, then some other you're a great leader already. So
No, no, you're you're very kind, Josh. I have to ask you. This is
sure.
early morning on the U.S. Pacific Coast. You're speaking from the eastern side, but it's still morning. And now we are in 2024. What's cooking lately in life? What are you keeping yourself occupied with these days?
Sure. Well, you mentioned that mostly I'm filling my days as coach, mentor, advisor for founders, for solo product managers, for first time heads of product at very early stage companies, the kind of work I had been doing prior. And when I say prior, about a year and a half ago, my wife and I did this thing we talked about for a while, which was we swapped who the primary parent was. I wanted to give my wife a chance to put as much or as little time and attention into her career as she wanted, the way she'd allowed me to do. And if I were a better person, I would have found a job with like work life balance. But I'm not. I have a
Yeah,
whopping case of ADD. And if I wanted to make sure I didn't leave my kids at the bus stop, like I might have done a couple of years ago, I knew that like first and foremost had to be parenting. So, first and foremost,
yeah.
parenting. I've been doing the coaching, the mentorship, the advisory work. I really love it. I love my clients. I love working with them. The moment we get off this call, I'm hopping on a call with one of my clients. I'm looking forward to that a lot. But I'll tell you the truth. Um, I really identify as an operator. I got into tech and I got into product management because I love building things. So you mentioned this in the intro. I decided to start a company, hopefully part time, because I'm not sure I have quite the fire and energy for a full time startup again. But I started Knect.lol. Um, Partly because of some things we'll talk about, because of the availability of data, the huge amount of data that our social networks, broadly speaking, are creating on our behalf. My own challenges managing those networks and managing the data, and the opportunity that new technologies like, easy access LLMs, thanks so much, OpenAI, have given us to build new technology. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. But yeah, I got a lot of irons in the fire these days.
No, I love it, and I can imagine it. But I want to step back here, right? Like
Sure.
I see that you go all the way. We just were talking about modems. Now you've also held very, very, very strategic roles, and we will get to the nuances of what OpenAI is doing. But before we get to that, as someone who has gone through that hustle at one point in time, today you have a lifestyle where you don't want to go beyond a certain point in time in terms of, let's say, creating that work life balance, or like
Yep.
that marginal push that we as founders in the name of hustle keep pushing our lives a little to the backside and so on. But I just want to understand, as someone who has seen the internet boom and
Hmm.
then go down, then saw maybe the cloud come and then it became a normal thing. Then the subscriptions came and the subscription became a normal thing. At some point in time, there was crypto.
Yep.
Then there were early models of AI wherein even things like sentiment prediction, or for that matter, guessing the next words, were a big deal.
Hmm.
And today we have whatever we have in the name of generative AI. How do you look at this whole phase? Like, what do you think of, given your experience? A lot of people, by the way, I know even in our audience for that matter, are always all the time thinking that, oh my God, we need to have a certain capability. This is the pace of change that we have probably never seen. And they are right, because they have not seen it in their life. But I think you would have some very interesting perspective there.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm a terrible futurist, and I'm not really much of a technologist. I'm much more of a practical, hands-on, tactical sort of person. But it does strike me that, of all of the technology booms I've watched, and I was a nerdy kid, and my dad was in, tech in the 80s as well. In fact, one day I realized I was working in the same office building in Kendall Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that he had been working in when I was in elementary school, when he was part of the 1980s AI boom. So, like, that's how far back all of this goes, right? It seems like there's kind of a cycle to all of these things, right? First, technology is a science experiment, right? And then it's a capital investment, and then it's metered,
Yeah.
right? It's, paid
Yeah.
for by the SIP or by whatever, and then it's free. or
Yeah.
effectively free. And we've seen this everywhere, right? That was the, it was the all of a sudden it's free is in many ways what
Yeah.
powered the web 2.0 boom in SaaS technology, right? Essentially
Yeah.
100%, not 100%, never 100%, but, sky high gross margins, right? Because you are giving away, logins, right? You're selling essentially logins with no marginal cost. Before that, this powered the home software boom, right? That, made Microsoft at least for a time, maybe still is the most valuable company in the world, where the marginal cost
Yeah.
of, a CD-ROM, and before that, a disk, like an actual floppy disk. That's the, for folks who are younger, that's the save button in most of your apps. It
Yeah.
refers to an actual piece of plastic that once was a thing
Yeah.
that held software and held data. Right. First, it's an science experiment, then a capital investment, right? Then pay for it by the SIP, and then it's essentially free. And I have to imagine the very same thing is going to play out with AI as well, right? Where are we, right? It's no longer a science experiment, right? Roll back the clock. Even 2 or 3 years ago, and you had people trying to build their own custom models, and now for most of our problems, using a commercial, off-the-shelf, SaaS-based, right, tool, API-driven tool like one of OpenAI's APIs or Google's or anybody else's. Right now, we're paying for it by the SIP, right? No longer capital investment, no longer a science experiment. It's still pretty expensive, right? This is the weird moment in
Yeah.
time when your SaaS software actually has, a reasonably high cost of goods sold. It's no longer free to deliver SaaS apps that incorporate AI, but that's not going to last forever. And at some point, it's also going to be effectively free, and then
Yeah.
something else will happen.
Yeah. Josh, but while I agree with you, I sometimes still find myself thinking about what is that future like. I think I was reading somewhere about as AI is delivering more and more things to
Mm-hmm.
become very easily accessible, or for that
Yep.
matter, let's say that we expect more out of every dollar that we are paying today. Even traditional enterprises who have always had the luxury of like just hiring a third party vendor as long as they were meeting certain security requirements or certain privacy clauses, and as long as there was no risk to the
Mm-hmm.
business, they were open to like outsourcing a lot of things that they depended on for their day-to-day operations. Today it's changing, and that's changing not just because the enterprise can build it themselves, that was always possible, but it's also changing because the enterprise is sort of, we're already seeing early signs of that space where more and more enterprises will be forced to charge less for everything that they're already selling,
Mm-hmm.
which means their profits will go down. And now we are no longer actually talking about just things being free, we are talking about things actually creating a cycle which could have a cascading effects. Any thoughts around that, as in how is pricing going to actually vary as we go into AI first world?
I mean, long term, right? Profit margins in competitive industries always move down towards zero. So before I was in tech, I studied economics. I wanted to go into international development. That was my goal coming out of college, right? All the economic models are the same, right? If you have a competitive space, it's going to push the profits down to zero. What's exciting about the tech space, right? And this is exciting about the incredibly robust venture capital industry. And in fact, the general capital and startup space in the United States, which doesn't all have to be high growth tech companies, is that
Yeah.
we're continually getting the benefits of margins being pushed down to zero, profits being pushed down to zero, and that wealth is being turned into new companies and new ideas and new entrepreneurship. And that's exciting and it's dynamic. And I think it's something which is, very special about the U.S. economy. I think possibly one of the most special things
Yeah.
about U.S. economies. And anytime you see, a long-term high amount of profit, right, as a rate, right, that's a moment you realize that there's some kind of regulatory capture, right? Something's going on, some kind of monopoly
Yeah.
effect, whether it's a local monopoly or a economy-wide monopoly, some kind of monopoly effect, and that's not going to last forever. I would say,
Yeah.
interestingly, the one thing that has been immune over countless economic and technology cycles is that things that human beings need and pay for haven't materially changed in the past 100 years, right? We need to get
Yeah.
to our jobs. We need to be entertained. We need food. We want to support others, right? Entertainment, right? The mediums have changed. The kinds of foods we eat have changed. How we go to restaurants, the details of the experiences have changed. How those things are delivered to us has changed dramatically. um, but doing a better and better job of meeting the tastes and moods and needs and desires of human beings. Like that really is the core of most technology.
Yeah, got it. But on that note, because most of our audience is actually someone who deals with data,
Yeah.
and I know you just talked about Connect.lol, which is also using social data. I'm wondering, as you go about advising and mentoring these founders that you work with in whatever capacity, be it now, be it in the past, and basically, I'm just the core thought is as these people are building data focused products, right? Like
Hmm.
it's going to become more and more key to sort of tie it to the business value. We are
Yep.
going to see a world where everything now needs to be about how much is this impacting ROI. Now let's say someone is thinking about a product that saves time
Hmm.
because maybe I'm empowering someone who's crunching data. Do you think that is going to be enough? And if not, how should a founder who's approaching this today think about identifying that business value? How do you tie something which is the time saved in crunching data to, let's say, the ROI? And honestly, just trying to probably dig down a couple
Yeah.
of stories, maybe from all the founders you have talked to.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm going to just caveat this by saying I think I'm a pretty mediocre founder. That's the reason why, I started a
You're too
company,
kind.
did sell it to Google. Mostly that was because we got lucky. But there has been a thread, a data thread, tying together most of my tech career. I went to Babson College, which is
Yeah.
here in the Boston area, a decently
Yeah.
well-known MBA program, known for its entrepreneurship. At Babson,
Yeah.
my fellowship advisor was a guy named Tom Davenport, who at the time was writing a lot about data. And one of the
Yeah.
insights that my co-founder and I had, that this was, I would say, inspired by and encouraged by Professor Davenport, was the fact that there's a lot of data, but gathering that data together in a way that provides proprietary insights. So access to proprietary data, right, which sometimes you can collect and sometimes you can generate, and tying the
Yeah.
data together to generate proprietary insights, there's a lot of lasting value created there. So
Yeah.
our startup, our proprietary data was we convinced grocery chains to give up their scanner data to us. Every time you're checking out and the machine goes beep, to get data from
Yeah.
that. And at our peak, we had data for about 15, 20% of US grocery transactions, which is a
Ooh,
pretty astounding
wow.
amount of data.
Yeah.
Google didn't want us for the data. That wasn't actually, as it turns out, that wasn't why they acquired us. It was one of the things they were concerned about when they acquired us. But that was part of what powered the product that we built. Um, GasBuddy, right? GasBuddy was powered by one of the first crowdsourced proprietary data sets that ever existed, which was fuel price data. It was an army of
Yeah.
roughly 10 million drivers across the US, Canada, and Australia watching fuel prices at the stations they drove past or the stations they visited and updating them automatically. Anytime on the internet you see fuel price data, it's probably coming from GasBuddy, whether you're seeing inside of
Yeah.
Google or AAA or the GasBuddy app or any place else. That's GasBuddy data powering that and being able to use that to do not just return it to end users, but also to do all sorts of cool predictive analytics on top of that.
Yeah.
I spent exactly a year, was not a great fit for me, at a company called Catalina Marketing, which is another grocery marketing company, the one that my friend Ben and I started our company to compete against. Spent a year working there. They also had scanner data, also were able to do interesting proprietary things with that. At ALYCE, right, this was an AI company. We were building AI generated profiles of people's personal interests. So somebody could do a better job of professional marketing to them, which you can think of as being,
Yeah.
delightful or creepy, depending on how skillfully it's done. Um,
Yeah.
and then at BRIGIT, which is a consumer fintech, BRIGIT is wildly successful because it has a unique underwriting model, unique proprietary underwriting model that allows it to advance money to everyday Americans at a much higher rate than anybody else is able to, while still maintaining its healthy loss ratios. So that was a lot of Josh talking. But if you have access to proprietary data or proprietary ways of organizing that data or proprietary insights, or ideally all three of those things around that data, you have the opportunity to give some kind of exceptional and unusual and therefore profitable value. If you don't,
Hmm.
That's okay, right? There's lots of needs for data inside every aspect of the enterprise, inside every aspect of tech companies and tech-enabled companies both, right? Lots of important calculations. It's just unlikely you're going to be able to make, excessive amounts of money from it, which is totally fine, right?
Yeah.
Companies run on data, right? This has been true since the 1920s when factories embraced Taylorism, and it was a dude with a stopwatch stand next to a person running a machine, measuring how long things took. Take that, expand it, 10 orders of magnitude. And that is the modern enterprise today.
Yeah. Josh, I have to ask you this, and I'm going to make it sound serious, but what does someone who has the data of 20% of all the checkouts
Yeah.
across US know? What is the funny information that you knew back then? Were there very interesting patterns?
Were there very
Something
interesting
you could share
patterns?
with us?
There are, I'll give you two examples of interesting patterns. Um, One was counterintuitive to what most people
Yeah.
thought was true about grocery marketing, right? The classic stories about targeted grocery marketing was if you found, so was the observation that a lot of nighttime checkouts at grocery stores were for two items, diapers and beer, right? So
Wow.
the received wisdom was if somebody was purchasing diapers and not purchasing beer, you should promote beer to them.
Or that also
Or
tells you that
maybe the
they
reverse. I'm
probably
not
have a
entirely
baby.
sure if that makes a whole lot of sense, right? And what we discovered was generally the opposite. If you had a common pairing of products like diapers and beer, and somebody wasn't buying one of those products, they really, really, really didn't want the other one, right? If somebody's doing something unusual, chances are it's because they don't want it. That wasn't always the case, and it varies from category to
Oh.
category. It was interesting to see if somebody's buying baby food but not diapers, or diapers but not baby food. They're buying those things otherwise. So you have some products and categories which are going to always be complementary or almost always be
Yeah.
complementary, and some where the absence of them tells you something really interesting about the person who's shopping. Um,
Mm.
the second really
Wow.
kind of fun insight is when you're looking at how items get paired up, especially unusual pairings inside of people's baskets. It's I think your audience knows this, right? Naively finding interesting insights in large data sets, right, is relatively easy. The challenge is figuring out what those things mean in like human language. So we'd find these interesting pairings, and it took us a long time to figure them out. But it's amazing how often people buy things that they're at the same actual level in the grocery store, right? So
Yeah.
somebody who buys a lot of stuff from the bottom two shelves, right? Maybe they got kids with them, and the kids like pulling things off of those shelves and putting them into the grocery basket, right? And that's the thing that's defining. Um,
Yeah. So this adds a very interesting perspective to what I anyway wanted to ask you. Now you're talking about a kid probably, let's say, picking items off a shelf and putting it in the basket. This is something that only the store can confirm.
yep,
And on the other side, we were talking about a lot of data sets. So you talked about your experience with retail, you talked about your experience with CPG, healthcare, fintech, right? Like, and
yep,
in overall, data is everywhere, but converting that data into an insight sometimes becomes very tricky.
yeah,
Now, where does the bottom line come in? What's that fine line where you have to go in and say, hey, this can only be answered by a human being? Because I see a lot of products coming out today and saying we are going to kick out analysts,
yeah,
we are going to kick out that human contact, and maybe that is also possible. But
yep.
just your take on what it took to go from that data to that insight, and what's the future in your view?
Yeah. So I think anybody is capable of generating insights. And in some organizations, it's analysts. In some organizations, it's researchers, UX researchers. In some organizations, it's data scientists. In a lot of organizations, it might be product managers. I think it's not the person's title or their role that to me best predicts who's going to come up with the insights. It's to be who's the person who best understands the context in which that data is generated, which almost always means who's the person who has the best and the most empathic understanding of the end user. So you had a
Yeah.
question before about somebody analyzing a program or programming and looking to make it more efficient, and can you monetize that? Well, the person who's going to figure that out is the person who most deeply understands, like, what is the work, what is the job of that particular programmer, right? And what are they trying to
Yeah.
accomplish? What's hard for them and what's easy for them, and what is their life like? I mean, that is the crux of modern product management. But the best organizations that do this are ones where it's not just one person or one role's job to do it. It's where everybody in the team does it. And I'll say,
Yeah.
you know, I've hired the same head of data and data engineering twice now at two different companies. And the reason I did
Yeah.
is because beyond like his great technical skills, beyond like he's a funny guy, he's a lot of fun to have on a team, he works really, really hard beyond all those things. He throws himself at understanding like who is the person who I'm collecting data about and who is the person that we are building for. And because he understands those things, the insights happen, right? So the
Yeah.
person who looks at that data, right, of why are these pairings together and doesn't grocery shop and has ever been inside of a grocery store doesn't really understand, right? It was the
Yeah.
person who figured that out, that insight around the height. I think, and I can go check with my friend Ben, but I think the insight came from the person noticing these patterns, getting confused, and actually like walking to a grocery store and creepily following a couple of shoppers around to be like, what is going on here? Like, oh, I got it now. They got the insight, validated it with the data, and we can all feel really good and tell a fun story now. So that
Yeah.
empathic
And
understanding
without
is the
that,
crux.
yeah, and without that insight, that's like you'd probably end up doing the wrong thing. But do you see AI changing anything? Like now everyone is talking about a lot of new possibilities that have come up. What part of this journey should the AI replace, and what part should best be left to human beings?
I'm a t- That's a big philosophical question. Um, I am a terrible futurist, but I generally think,
Wait,
yeah,
wait. So I know I don't want to make it sound philosophical.
yeah,
When I say what should best be left to AI, I'm not talking in the sense of ethics.
yeah,
We're simply thinking of, okay, let's say there is a bunch of data set lying around, and then we're trying to convert it into an insight. The AI can probably stitch together things, or should it?
yeah,
The AI can probably clean the data for you, should
mm-hmm,
it? The AI can add context by
yeah,
asking questions to you, should it?
mm-hmm,
And that way. So, not in the
yeah,
broader sense of AI and ethics, but of course,
yeah.
go ahead. Sorry,
I
I
think
interrupted.
what's lacking today for AI is it can't simulate like a future and make predictions around it. At least not with complicated things like grocery shopping, right? When I started telling you the story about the person checking out at night with the beer and the cigarettes, in your head was a picture, right? You were imagining a supermarket, probably one you'd been to. You're imagining it being dark outside. You were imagining some dad who maybe hadn't, shaved and, longer than I haven't shaved, right? Looking a little bedraggled, grabbing the thing of cigarettes, walking past a beer cooler and being like, I could use a beer, and grabbing one out of there as well, right? You can picture this inside of your head,
Yeah,
right? And that's the
yeah,
thing that's missing,
totally.
right? Certainly, if I asked, ChatGPT to write a story about that, it would write a really compelling story, but it wouldn't inherently understand that story at a deep enough level to be able to tell new stories about things that hadn't existed and test the parameters of that story against what it knew about the world, right? In the way that humans
Yeah.
can. And, I'm never going to be one to bet against technology. Of course, that's going to come at one point, but we're not there yet today.
Yeah, but Josh, on that note, you have worked at BRIGIT,
Yep.
GasBuddy. We just talked about ALYCE. Now you know, or let's say you have firsthand seen how the data had this context, which made the insight very different from what you would ideally imagine. You would never go in and say there is a human being involved who is pulling like those little toes and little feet and whatnot. But as a decision maker, go back
Yeah.
to your days when you were, let's say, at Alice or GasBuddy, and someone was bringing a tool
Mm-hmm.
which they would go in and position as this helps you get to faster insights. What are you thinking in your head now that you have gone through that context? Do you still see a use for a tool like that? And what is the lens? In general, the question I'm asking is if a founder who's
Yeah.
listening to this episode is thinking about, oh, how do I go and position the product that I'm working on, because there are, of course, unavoidable factors that will compromise the accuracy of my insights. How should I
Yeah.
position it to someone who is maybe a decision maker deciding on the budget and so on?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's hard to sell tools to startups. So maybe this is a
Yeah,
bad example, and I should give you the name of my friend Ben, who's now working at a startup that helps large enterprises better integrate in AI and machine learning tools into their engineering stack. Because right, what are startups
yeah,
really good at? They're really good at technology, and they're really bad at almost everything else. right? What are enterprises good at? Everything else. It's the technology side, right? Most enterprises are pretty bad at software development. So he tries to do that part of it. And the economics of selling to an enterprise are really, really different. The
Yeah.
economics of a startup, certainly one, we've got a little bit of a cash crunch right now in startup land. But historically, the most expensive thing that startups have are people by far. And anything that you can get to accelerate the work that people are doing to make them more effective is going to be a pretty easy sell. Um, as a
Yeah.
relatively experienced exec, I'll push back on a lot of assumptions. If I have an engineer, a data scientist, somebody come to me and say, "Hey, Josh, can you help me get some budget for this thing?" I'll say, "Have you ever used it before?" And if they say, "Nope," I'll
Mm.
say, "Okay, this is a science experiment that we're going through, and we have to treat this as a science experiment. And no matter what the sales team is telling you about improvements in effectiveness or efficiency, it doesn't really matter." But if this is a tool
Yeah.
they've used before, they're familiar with, they can articulate how it fit into our existing technology stack. Everybody else largely agrees, and it's a pretty easy sell to make because I'll do almost anything to help them be more effective.
Got it. But does that change? Like go back to your time at Google, and of course, Google itself has evolved by a
Yeah,
large shot. But go back to your time at Google or any of the enterprises that you may have interacted with in the past. Does that decision making change? Does a founder who is approaching like a large enterprise
yeah.
has
So
to account for new factors?
So Google's not a large enterprise, right? Google's a weird thing, right? And Google's job is to keep engineers happy and to keep engineers satisfied. That is their entire strategy, right? Is twofold: keep engineers happy and sell a lot of ads, right? And everything else kind of falls out of that very, very simple strategy. So Google will say something like, "Okay, we're thinking about bringing a tool inside. Let's build it instead. Wouldn't that be fun?" Right? So Google has a bajillion, hand-built tools, as do most other really large tech companies. Um, so, really, what you're talking with enterprise is a large tech enabled company. And those are places where your engineering, your technology organization, the parts that I'm familiar with, and let's be clear, I'm a total idiot when it comes to large tech enabled companies. That's why I don't work at those places, right? I'm bad at them, right? But at those places, the technology part of the company is always going to be a cost center, which is kind of a bummer for some of the people who work there because they're always going to be a cost center. It's fun to be a profit center. It's fun to be the driver of value in the company. But it also means it's relatively easy as a vendor to sell into there because if you can sell a story about implementation costs, right, plus technology risk, plus whatever the technology costs, like the actual technology itself costs, right, the product you're trying to sell costs,
Yeah.
is lower than the increase in efficiency, which almost always means getting rid of people or not hiring people, then you have a sale.
Hmm.
And if you can't do that, you don't have a sale. And they have a whole acquisition department who's dedicated to figuring these things out. And they're going to look at what you're trying to do very, very skeptically. But at least there's a process to
Got
buying
it.
it, right? You will never sell these
But
things into Google. Good luck.
yeah, no, of course. And I couldn't agree more. But Josh, on that note, you actually sold a company to Google. Did you
Yeah.
ever plan, like, let's get back to
Yes.
your
That was
founder
literally
days?
our strategy.
And can you walk me
Yeah.
through, like, what's the story there? Yeah.
So first of all, the model for our company was, and we had a slide like this. It was in our sales deck, and we just turned our sales deck into our, buy our company deck as well. And the model says, here's what Google did to online advertising. They took something that was based around impressions, that was sold slowly, that there was a sales team behind it, there was no insights or data, and they Googleified it, right? Which wasn't even a term at the time, right? But they made it self-service, they made it pay for performance, analytics were baked in and for free. It was optimizing, it was data-driven, targeted, all those sorts of good things that we now expect out of online advertising, which wasn't true before Google invented it. Simplified revisionist history, but close enough, right? And then we said,
Yeah.
we're doing the very same thing for grocery advertising and for grocery promotions, right? Which at the time were, mass delivered, we're not targeted, we're slow to put together, it was a very manual process, we're not data driven, there was really no analytics, right? All the bad things about the old school of advertising. And what we did is we had a marketing automation tool which allowed you to do self-service and targeted and analyze and optimize and all the good stuff that one expects.
Yeah.
Um, so from the very first day, we saw the grocery space as being ripe for the very same kind of innovation that the online advertising space was. Turns out we were wrong,
Yeah.
but that's okay. So that sales pitch was pretty easy. In fact, we even found ourselves in the very same building in Cambridge that Google was in from a different company. And when it came time to sell our company, when we realized, or rather about a year and a half before we knew we would want to sell the company, we made a pivot to align what we were building to the thing that was really hot in the marketing space at the time, which was deal of the day sites. This was the Groupons of the world, but there were other ones. There was Living Social at the time. There was Buy With Me,
Yeah.
and Google had one called Google Local Offers or something like that. Google had built one as well. So we built a tool to power those with our own technology at grocery stores. So we could do grocery deal of the days, which was the hot thing at the time. We ran a bunch of those
Yeah.
with Groupon, and we used that to create a competitive process where Google ultimately was one who acquired us.
But
So
what
very
got you
conscious.
actually noticed? But what got you noticed? Was it the competitive product that you just talked about, like the
Um,
grocery product of the day?
yeah, what got us noticed wasn't anything. So this isn't a data story, right? This is a sales story. We
Yeah,
were a
yeah,
couple of naive first time founders. Um, we had hired our CEO, but we decided that selling the company was the very same exercise as selling the product. So what do? Right? We created a list of target companies who we wanted to reach. We analyzed each one of them. We figured out who we knew inside of each one of those companies to give ourselves an edge into the organization. Our head of sales happened to be friends with a relatively senior director of advertising who was doing some shopper marketing stuff, at the time. And
yeah,
he reached out and he made some calls inside. We found the product manager at Google, um, who was in charge of the stuff that we thought would be a good fit for us. And we figured out
yeah,
where he was going to be, like at what conference. And we figured out some things about him personally. We sent our, like, at the time, 22, maybe 23-year-old engineer to that very same conference to go become friends with the guy. Like, we had a very, very clear strategy. But we had one
yeah.
for Groupon as well. We had one for PayPal. We had one for NCR. We had one for all the other companies we were talking to. So that was just, honestly, it was just good sales. We were very lucky with the timing,
No, got it.
right? We were able to follow a trend, which we were incredibly fortunate about. But fundamentally, like at some point, it became a sales process. Though I will
But does
say,
that
our pitch to Google was
experience?
better than our pitch to anybody else.
Yeah, no, I can see it. Like it looks very simple
Yep.
from the outside or from the sideline, but it looks like everything was planned, and that is where most people go wrong today. I see this whole thing. By the way, I believe that as we get into the world of AI, more and more companies will find a tougher time getting acquired because it's just that everything today is barely proprietary. Most
Yeah.
of the people who are building stuff is just like a wrapper. Even if they don't want to, it has become very tough finding something which can help you create a proprietary mode, which is
Yep.
why I think acquisitions will likely see a decline. But my question here is that as you have been a founder who has
Mhm.
gone through it, and I'm glad we are finally talking a little bit also not just about data, because a bunch of people in our audience also happen to be founders and
Great.
VCs. And on that note, as you have gone through this journey of successfully exiting or selling a company to Google,
Mhm.
how does it change your mentality today? What are you trying to do with Connect? Why are you building
Yeah.
it? And do you see yourself thinking on the lines that you used to think back then when you were doing Google, like
Um,
building your product that you sold to Google?
So for Connect, I'm building it primarily because I want this for myself. That's what's driving this. I want this product to exist. I spent a while looking for it. I wasn't able to find it. I tried all the products in the space. None of them do. None of them did what I wanted. And it's my desire to be able to use this for myself that is driving my the best outcome of my kind of search process would have been discovering someone else built it, and all I would have to do is pay them money. Would have happily paid them 20, 30, $40 a month to not have to go build this thing myself. So first and foremost, I want this to exist. But you're right. I can't quite turn off that part of my brain that says, what are the potential exits? I don't plan to raise money for this. I don't plan to take angel or VC. I plan this to be bootstrapped. Um, you know, it's a very different kind of a business, but I can't help but think, well, who would this be useful for and how would this fit into their existing strategies? And what's the thing of value that I'm creating? And you're right, a lot of AI additions to existing products have been really disappointing. I mean, they're fine, right?
Yeah.
Notion added AI, right, a while back. And what is it? It's a little bit easier than having to go to chat, the chat GPT interface, type in a query, and then copy and paste it back in, right? It's a little bit
Yeah.
easier and a little bit less good. And
Yeah.
I don't know, almost every tool I have right now has, some kind of AI functionality, which is again a little less good than writing the prompt yourself, right? A little easier, a little bit less good than
Yeah.
writing the prompt yourself. So it's largely been disappointing. Um, I think many of the most interesting uses for AI in startups have been what I would describe as being small products, right? One where
Yeah.
the person had a very narrow itch they wanted to fix. I have a buddy who wanted to help people um, get better at behavioral interviewing for product management interviews. So he came up with a
Yeah.
set of like questions, and you would write your answer in to a little box, and it would give you like responses back. It took him, I don't know, a weekend, weekends to put this thing together. There's no competitive moat here, right? But because of that, he was able to
Yeah.
deliver something like really valuable, right? That nobody else had done
Yeah.
because there's no money in it, right? It's just really interesting and really delightful. I have another friend who's building a social network app for like slow and quiet social networks. And it's not at all an
Yeah.
AI product, but he realized that he could just do a much better job of summarizing threads on a daily basis than like what was out there just by, a little bit of prompt engineering, feeding it in and able to like do novel uses. Is this AI thing going to generate, you know, a billion, right? 100 million, even $1 million of value? No, it's just a little small use that makes things a little bit better. But fundamentally, right, these are just existing products. Coaching somebody and being a better interviewer, right? Social networks, bespoke social networks, things like that.
Yeah. But do we have like buyers of Connect.lol in our audience? Like what does the tool do? Can you give us a quick
Yeah,
overview?
it is. Well, it doesn't exist yet. We're building it. We're right now we're doing the technical validation side of it. Like, can we actually build it? But if we do, it will be an intelligent companion for you in helping you to manage and make sense of your growing professional network. I know you and I connected on uh, LinkedIn because we had a friend in common who was on the show before. I'm blanking on who it
Yeah.
was. Um,
Yeah.
but I think she and I
Abhijit.
connected like on a Slack before,
Oh, okay.
right? My social network, it isn't just email anymore. It's not just LinkedIn anymore. It contains Slack, Discord, WhatsApp, Telegram, messages, all these different channels, right? It's all expanding. And as somebody with a whopping case of ADD, I know I couldn't keep track of it. And after talking to 200 other people like you and I, startup aficionados, you might call us, um, we discovered nobody can really keep track of that. And your feed is full of people who are not necessarily relevant to you or who you're interested in staying in touch with. People who you do care about are falling by the wayside. You might be overwhelmed by the flow of emails and messages and texts and all of that. And you're dropping things you don't want to drop. Either you're forgetting commitments that you made, or you're just forgetting, important conversations that you want to follow up on. And I imagine Knect.lol being a delightful little companion. Imagine it sits on your shoulder, keeping track of all this information and whispering in your ear when important context comes up. Hey, Josh,
Yeah.
here's somebody you were chatting with last month about this thing, and it looks like you're going to follow up with them and you never did. Do you want to reach back out?
Oh,
Or,
cool.
hey, Josh,
Yeah.
you're traveling to Sheboygan, Wisconsin next month. Do you want to reach out to any of the 4 people who you know in Sheboygan? Let them know you're going to be in town. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. I would kill for something like that. As in today in the process of building Crunch, we have so many messages going out.
Yeah.
And as in general, I'm trying to talk to more and more people.
Yep.
We're trying to figure out how at the grassroots level someone is interacting with data. What is a head of product thinking? What is a
Hmm.
founder and a CEO thinking?
Yeah.
How does it change with different industries and different companies? And every time somebody goes and says, can you please touch base in like February? I'm out on a vacation. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to remember it.
Yeah.
And you do put it in an Excel sheet or you do put
Yep.
it in a notes, but like those
Or
reminders, they get pretty messy. So,
they get messy. And look, I think that there are moments in our lives, I think of as being deterministic moments, where you can't afford to let anything slip, right? You're selling a company, right? You're in sales, right, of some kind, right? You're looking for a job, very kind of deterministic moments. And that's when the spreadsheet works. Or there's a number of really excellent
yeah.
personal CRMs, Dex, Monica, Clay, all great personal CRMs, all worth, might be a good fit for you. But most of the time, right? We're trying to just get a little bit better at kind of the fuzzy cloud of connections that are kind of swirling all around us. And that's, the companion part, right? That's the, people talk about Notion being a second brain. I don't know if I need a second brain, but I could use a little extra processing power on the one that I have right now. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping to deliver to people.
Got it. Got it. Josh, we are nearing the end of our show. I want to close on one question, which I have always looked
Sure.
forward to asking from anyone I host on this show. As you have gone through your life, you have observed, learned a few things, made a few mistakes, and like just figured things out on the way as well. Is there any closing note that you would like to share with us, which comes with a learning, a moment of deep introspection, something which you yourself realize later on, something which hits us hard?
So, as you pointed out in the very beginning, I'm old, so I have a lot of these. Um, but having kids,
we could do more than one.
that's
We could
okay.
do more
I'll
than
say
one.
that having kids has given me new insights into things that, you know, maybe I kind of knew before, or maybe I've been said before, but you don't really understand them until you see them reflected back. I think, at least I haven't understood them until I saw them reflected back in my own children. Um, one of the offhand things I would say when I was younger is that my life has been like a continual series of failures, punctuated by the very rare and very valuable success, which I think is true of a lot of folks. Um,
Yeah,
but once I had kids,
probably everyone.
what I realized is that there's a thing that like kids are taught in school, which we kind of forget, right? Which is that kids almost, especially once they're school age, but kids almost exclusively are doing things they're bad at, right? In fact,
Yeah,
that's the way that school works. Is they're introduced to a thing which they're bad at because they've never learned it before, and the moment they get good at it, right? They ace that test is the moment you start a new thing for them to learn, which they're also bad at. And at some
yeah,
point, we become adults, and as adults, we're mostly only doing things that we're good at,
yeah,
right? Right? I'm good at my job, right? You're good at your job. And I like to cook and I'm good at cooking, so I cook. My wife hates cooking. She's not very good at it, so she doesn't cook. Very few people take on uh, new skills, certainly not on a regular basis, of things they're bad at. If you enjoy bike riding and are good at it, you bike ride. If you never learned to ride a bike, most people don't do it as a grown up, right? Maybe we'll take on a
yeah,
sport, maybe a challenge, maybe a fitness thing, but mostly we do things we're bad at. And that's too bad because as kids, they're learning frustration tolerance and they're
yeah,
practicing frustration tolerance every single day. And frustration tolerance is probably one of the most important skills that we have as adults, and we very rarely practice it thoughtfully. And by practice it, I mean,
yeah,
desire to be better at it, make a plan to be better at it, do the thing, and then watch yourself afterwards and say, like, okay, did I do that well or not? And if not, how can I do better next time? Right? That kind of whole learning cycle. We don't
yeah,
do that thoughtfully as adults, and that's really too bad. Um, the people who I see being most effective as adults, the most effective professionally, are the ones who are best at frustration tolerance. Um,
hmm,
there's a lot written about it in a lot of wisdom traditions, right? This is the basis of Greek Stoicism. This is the basis of Buddhist psychology. Is variations on this frustration tolerance, but it's worth thinking about that, each one of us ourselves, and how we can exercise our own frustration tolerance and be better at it. And certainly, how do we make sure that's a thing that we are nurturing in our own children and if we're managers and the people that we work with.
wow. I have never thought about children's learning things that they're always bad at. Like I've
Yeah.
always framed it in a very different way, but that shakes a lot of things for me, and I love it. Like step out of your comfort zone, but at the same time keep checking if you are able to tolerate the frustration and like keep growing through it. Josh, this has been phenomenal. On a closing note, if anyone wants to reach out to you, where should they find you? I'm of course gonna drop the link in the
Yeah, you can
description.
drop the link in there. And again, as I said in the beginning, my parents blessed me with amazing SEO. So all I got to do is Google my name and you'll find a bajillion ways to get in touch. Um, I try to be pretty open on LinkedIn. In fact, folks who check out my LinkedIn page will notice there is a place to book time with me. I have a completely open schedule. One of the joys of being retired from salaried work and the privilege of being able to do that means that I try to open
Yeah,
my calendar up to almost anybody who thinks they could benefit from a chat. So go ahead and book time with me. I do office hours, do a little more searching of my name, and you can find a way to get a full half hour, just you and me, whoever you happen to be, whatever you want to talk about. If there's a way I could be helpful to you, I would love to. Reach out on LinkedIn, reach out from my own site. I don't really do Twitter. After I do one of these things, I try to check my Twitter messages a little bit, but I'm kind of off of it. Elon Musk is too complicated a character these days for me really to want to get involved. But I'm pretty easy to find online, and whoever you are out there, I'm always happy to chat.
That's very, very, very kind of you, Josh. Thank you so much for taking the time out
It was a
this morning
pleasure.
with us. Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye bye.
thank you so much.